Introduction to Philosophy, Lecture 5 on Metaphysics and Epistemology. Our text picks up in Chapter 5 with René Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, which is considered a classic in metaphysics and still widely read. This chapter is another difficult one, not quite as difficult as Plato's Theaetetus, which we examined in Chapter 3, but still quite challenging. First philosophy refers to metaphysics, since some of the earliest questions considered in metaphysics were also the most fundamental. For example, Aristotle's Metaphysics, he discusses, among other things, being qua being, or the study of being as being. So it's not so much the study of an existing thing, but rather the study of the quality of existence itself. A simpler way to think about it might be, what are the qualities something must have to exist in reality? Perhaps extension in space is necessary for something to be or to exist, or perhaps it needs some kind of underlying substance. Since Aristotle, as we've discussed, the concept of metaphysics has expanded, but it still includes the early fundamental questions that justify its position as first philosophy. For example, Thomas Aquinas also recognized metaphysics as first philosophy, since it is the study of what comes first in ontological order, that is to say, the first causes of being. Furthermore, according to Aquinas, the sciences in general rely on metaphysics for their first principles. But turning back to Descartes' meditations specifically, there's also a lot of epistemology involved, such as Descartes answering the question, how can I know I exist? With one of the most famous one-liners in all of philosophy, I think, therefore I am. Descartes first articulated this in his discourse on method, but he re-articulates it here in the Meditations. However, the primary claim, or the primary aim, of this work is to demonstrate mind-body dualism, that is, that the mind and body are different substances, and also to prove that God exists. And these are metaphysical conclusions. The epistemology of this work, such as the radical methodological skepticism he employs, is secondary to his metaphysical goals. Our text begins with Descartes' first meditation on things we may doubt. The meditator begins this section acknowledging that he had been acquiring beliefs since his youth that he now realizes are mistaken. He also recognizes that the whole system of beliefs that he had been building since childhood may be based on or riddled with mistaken beliefs and opinions. However, since he doesn't know which beliefs exactly are mistaken, or how many of them he possesses, he decides to start with the assumption that all of his beliefs and opinions are wrong. His plan is to rid himself of all opinions and to rebuild his system of beliefs from the ground up with principles of which he can be certain. In doing so, he acknowledges that, since our senses sometimes deceive us, he also has reason to dismiss the beliefs that he had acquired through sense experience, even though what we perceive through our senses is often that of which we consider ourselves to be the most certain. Seeing is believing, as they say. The classic example is the bent appearance of an oar in water, but we might be more familiar with hearing our phone ring, but not having any missed calls, or feeling it vibrate in our pockets, even though our pockets are empty. This dismissal of sense perception always reminds me of Nietzsche, who said, "I'm not upset that you lied to me, I'm upset because I can't trust you anymore." The meditator also acknowledges that it would seem crazy to question whether he had a body or existed where he thought he was, but points out that he has had dreams that seemed as real as the present moment. The meditator also anticipates the objection that, even if we are dreaming, we can still know we have bodies and that the world exists, because the content of our dreams is provided by our experiences in real life. Just like artists in real life create images of non-existent monsters like dragons with serpent scales and bat wings. They do so by combining features of animals that actually do exist. And even if the artist imagines something so novel that it cannot be compared to anything else that exists, certain features still seem like they must exist, such as the color of the piece, its shapes, and its quantities. The meditator infers from this that knowledge acquired through the sense-dependent empirical sciences like physics and astronomy are more dubious than arithmetic or geometry, because whether asleep or awake, 2 plus 3 equals 5, and squares always have 4 sides. These were important observations since they called into question the empiricism that was motivating science and philosophy at the time. But the meditator doesn't stop there. He goes on to entertain the idea that he could be being deceived. He doesn't think God would allow us to be constantly deceived, because deception is evil. But he nevertheless knows that he has been deceived before. So, he supposes, maybe God doesn't exist, and it's possible that a godlike demon is able to deceive him in his every thought. If this were the case, he would also have reason to doubt the more reliable simple sciences as well. At this point, you may be wondering why the meditator is entertaining such bizarre and whimsical extreme ideas as the so-called Cartesian demon. But he's doing this because he's trying to come up with a situation that makes knowledge and certainty as difficult as possible to acquire, if it's even possible at all. If he can find one thing that he can be certain of in this extreme situation, this extreme state of skepticism, then he will know that it is indubitable. He needs to find something that he can be absolutely certain of to form a foundation for further potential beliefs, to form a belief system that isn't as dubious as his current belief system. In Meditation 2, the meditator admits that he is drowning in skepticism at this point, unable to plant his feet on the ground or sustain himself by swimming on the surface. And he is nevertheless going to continue this previous thought experiment of the Cartesian demon deceiving him in his every thought until he can either find one thing of which he can be certain or prove that nothing can be certain at all. So he continues to consider that all of his beliefs are false, that nothing he perceives is real, nothing he remembers ever happened, that body, figure, motion, and place are merely fictions of his mind placed there by an all-powerful demon who is constantly deceiving him. So what is left that he can be certain of, if his body and the world could be the lies of the demon? One consequence of this extreme skepticism that does not follow is that the meditator does not exist. For if he is being deceived, then he must exist. Therefore, even in this extreme situation, where any certainty seems impossible, he can be certain that if he proclaims or thinks that he exists, he cannot be wrong about that. This is Descartes' rearticulation of his cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. Though this selection from Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy ends here in our text, if you're interested in seeing how he rebuilds his system of beliefs, justifies the sciences, and professes to prove that God exists, I would highly recommend reading the rest of Descartes' Meditations, especially if you're a philosophy major. Indeed, at university, philosophy majors will be expected to have some understanding of Descartes, and of course, Plato and the other thinkers that we're going to be covering in this lower division course. But even if you're not a philosophy major, don't write off Descartes as a mere hand-wavy philosopher. Indeed, he made significant contributions to math and science beyond philosophy. The Cartesian plane is named after Descartes because he was the one who introduced it as the coordinate system to show that algebraic equations could be used to solve problems in geometry. Regardless of whether we find his arguments convincing anymore, his influence on the development of modern philosophy and his contributions to science and mathematics more than justify his title as the father of modern philosophy.